He wasn't dangerous, just waiting for someone to understand. The security footage plays on a loop in a dim control room, grainy black and white flickering under tired fluorescent lights, showing a German shepherd lunging forward in a blur of muscle and instinct, officers stepping back, voices tight, the label already decided before anyone asked why. And outside that room, behind reinforced steel bars, the dog sits now in silence, chest rising slow. Amber eyes tracking every movement like a soldier who never learned how to stand down, a warning sign. Bolted to the cage reads extreme risk in bold red letters, the kind that makes even seasoned handlers keep their distance. And somewhere down the hall, a clipboard gets signed with quiet finality. Less than 24 hours until the end of his service, not with honor, not with ceremony, just paperwork and a locked door. The air smells faintly of antiseptic and cold metal, the hum of ventilation echoing like a distant storm. And no one notices the smallest detail, the way the dog only reacts. When a certain scent drifts too close, the same sharp chemical note lingering in the room from earlier, the same one no one questions, because they already believe they know the story, aggressive, unstable, unfit, words spoken enough times that they become truth, until a new set of boots enters the corridor, slower, measured, stopping just outside the cage. Officer Daniel Hayes, recently transferred, reputation unclear. Eyes steady in a way that suggests he's seen things people don't write reports about. He doesn't reach for the taser on his belt, doesn't call for backup, he just stands there for a moment, listening, not to the growl, but to the silence underneath it. The kind of silence that carries memory. The dog lifts his head, not barking, not pacing, just watching, as if recognizing something that hasn't been spoken yet. And for the first time since the footage was recorded, the tension in the room shifts. Subtle, almost invisible, like the air before rain, Daniel takes one step closer, then another, ignoring the warning signs, ignoring the voices behind the glass telling him to keep his distance, because something doesn't add up, something about the way the dog holds himself, not wild, not broken, just waiting. And as the seconds stretch, the distance between them closes to just a few feet, the kind of distance where fear usually takes over, but instead, something else begins to rise, quiet, steady, unexplainable, like a memory neither of them can fully see yet. And in that moment, before anyone can stop him, before anyone can rewrite what happens next, Daniel makes a choice that no one in that building will ever forget. The room does not breathe while he moves closer, it only listens. The faint hum of fluorescent lights stretching longer with every step he takes, and behind the observation glass, two senior handlers exchange a glance that says this is a mistake they have seen before. Because every man who thought he could fix this dog walked away convinced of the same conclusion, that something inside that animal was broken beyond reach. But Daniel Hayes does not look at them, he does not look at the warning sign, he keeps his eyes on the dog, steady, unblinking, like he is trying to read something written beneath the surface, and the dog watches back, ears slightly forward, body still, not tense the way an uncontrolled animal would be, but coiled with something quieter, something that feels closer to anticipation than aggression. And that is the first thing Daniel notices. The second is the smell, faint but distinct, lingering in the air like a memory that refuses to leave, sharp, sterile, out of place in a kennel that should carry only the scent of fur and dust and metal. And Daniel pauses just long enough to take it in, just long enough for the pieces in his mind to begin aligning in a way that does not match the report he read earlier, because reports are written in certainty. And this feels like doubt, and doubt is where truth usually hides. He lowers himself slowly, not fully kneeling yet, just enough to shift his posture, to become smaller, less of a threat, the way he was once trained to approach something that had learned to fear before it learned to trust. And a voice behind the glass finally breaks the silence, telling him to step back, reminding him of protocol, of liability, of consequences. But Daniel does not respond, because the dog has moved, just a fraction, a shift of weight, a subtle adjustment that most would miss, but not him, not after everything he has seen. The dog is not preparing to attack, it is measuring distance, reading intent, waiting for something specific, something it has learned to recognize. And that is when Daniel reaches into his pocket, slow enough that no sudden motion startles the fragile balance in the room, and pulls out a small, unmarked bottle, the same one he noticed earlier on a nearby counter, the one that carries that sharp, clinical scent, and he studies it for a second, then his own hand, as if deciding whether he is willing to cross a line no one else has dared to approach, the kind of line that does not exist in training manuals, the kind that exists only in instinct, and without another word, without asking permission. He presses the nozzle and lets a fine mist settle across his skin, the scent rising immediately, cutting through the air like a signal, and the dog reacts, not with chaos, not with blind force, but with recognition, a sudden alertness that tightens every muscle without releasing it, like a memory snapping into place, and the entire room freezes, because now they are no longer watching a dangerous animal, they are watching a question unfold in real time, one that no report ever asked, one that no one wanted to answer, and Daniel lifts his hand slightly, just enough for the scent to carry, just enough to offer the dog the one thing it has been searching for without knowing how to explain it, and in that fragile, suspended moment, the distance between them becomes more than space, it becomes truth waiting to be revealed. The scent settles into the air like a quiet signal, invisible but undeniable, and the dog responds not with chaos, but with focus, his body tightening for a brief second before easing into something slower, something more deliberate, and Daniel feels it before anyone else sees it, that shift, that almost imperceptible change where fear gives way to recognition, and he does not move, not even an inch, because he understands that this moment is not about control, it is about trust, fragile and easily broken, the kind that cannot be forced, only offered, and behind the glass someone whispers for him to step away, another voice sharper now, warning him that he is crossing a line that exists for a reason, but Daniel keeps his hand where it is, open, steady, carrying that same sharp scent that once triggered everything, and the dog begins to move, slow at first. One step, then another, each paw landing with careful intention as if testing the ground beneath him, not hunting, not charging, just approaching, and the distance between them closes to a few feet, close enough now that Daniel can see the fine details in the dog's coat, the faint scars hidden beneath fur, the slight tremor in his breath, the kind that speaks not of aggression, but of memory, and that is when it becomes clear, this was never about defiance, it was about confusion. About a signal misunderstood, a warning that no one stopped to translate. The dog lowers his head slightly, nose lifting toward Daniel's hand, the scent guiding him, pulling something forward from a place buried deep inside training and instinct, and for a brief moment the entire room seems to hold its breath, because this is the point where everything should go wrong, where every report predicted failure, where every expectation collapses into the same outcome, but it does not, instead the dog pauses, just inches away, his amber eyes softening in a way no one in that building has seen before, and Daniel feels it, not as a victory, not as control, but as understanding, the kind that does not need words, only presence, and slowly, almost carefully, the dog leans in, not to strike, not to resist, but to examine, to confirm what his instincts are telling him, and when his nose finally touches Daniel's hand, it is gentle, searching, almost hesitant, like a question being asked after a long silence, and Daniel does not pull away, he does not react, he simply lets the moment exist, because this is where the truth begins to reveal itself, not in force, not in dominance, but in stillness, and in that stillness, something shifts completely, the tension that once filled the room dissolves into quiet disbelief, because the dog does not attack, he does not recoil, he stays, breathing steady now, grounded in something familiar, something safe, and Daniel understands it fully now. This dog was never broken, he was responding exactly the way he was trained to respond, only the signal was wrong, the context missing, the meaning lost somewhere between protocol and assumption. And as the dog remains there, calm, present, no longer alone in his confusion, Daniel realizes that what happens next will not just change the fate of one animal, it will force everyone watching to confront the possibility that they were never trying to fix a problem. They were misunderstanding a message all along. The contact lingers longer than anyone expects, not dramatic, not loud, just a quiet point of connection where everything that was assumed begins to unravel, and Daniel slowly lowers himself the rest of the way to one knee, bringing his body down to the dog's level, not as a command, but as an invitation, And the dog does not retreat, he does not tense, he stays, breathing in that familiar scent as if it is guiding him through something he has been trying to understand for a very long time. And behind the glass the room shifts from fear to disbelief, voices that once spoke in certainty now reduced to whispers, because what they are seeing does not match the story they have been telling, and Daniel finally speaks, his voice low, steady, not directed at the room, but at the dog, a tone that carries no authority, only calm, the kind used not to control, but to reassure, and the dog's ears flick slightly, responding not to the words, but to the feeling behind them, and Daniel notices something else now, something even smaller, the way the dog's eyes move, tracking not just him, but the environment, hyper-aware, scanning, as if still on duty, still searching for something that never arrived, and that is when it becomes undeniable. This was never aggression, this was vigilance without closure, a signal triggered without resolution, a loop that never ended because no one ever completed it. And Daniel lifts his other hand slowly, empty, open, giving the dog space to choose, not forcing contact, not demanding obedience, just offering presence, and after a moment that stretches longer than time should allow, the dog leans forward again, this time resting his head lightly against Daniel's forearm, not out of submission, but relief, and it is so subtle that some in the room almost miss it, but those who see it feel something shift deep inside, because that is not the posture of a threat. That is the posture of something that has finally found what it was looking for, and Daniel exhales quietly, a breath he did not realize he was holding, and he gently moves his hand along the side of the dog's neck, slow, deliberate, careful not to break the fragile trust that has formed, and the dog does not pull away, instead his body softens further, the tension that once defined him easing into something steadier, something grounded. And one of the senior handlers behind the glass steps closer now, eyes narrowed not in suspicion, but in realization. Replaying the footage in his mind, connecting details that were ignored before, the scent, the timing, the reaction, and suddenly the narrative they built begins to collapse under its own weight. Because if the dog was not reacting out of uncontrollable aggression, then what exactly was he responding to? And why did no one ask that question sooner? And Daniel knows the answer without needing to say it. Because he has seen it before in different forms, in people, in partners, in moments where instinct is mistaken for defiance, and he remains there, still kneeling, still steady, letting the dog rest in that space of understanding, because this is not about proving anything to the room, this is about giving something back to the one being who was never given a chance to be understood, and as the seconds pass, the silence in the room changes, no longer tense, no longer uncertain, but reflective. Heavy with the realization that what they are witnessing is not control, not training, but something far more rare, the moment when someone chooses to listen instead of judge, and in doing so, changes everything. The moment does not end, it deepens, stretching into something no one in that building has language for, and Daniel remains exactly where he is, one knee on the cold concrete, one hand resting lightly against the dog's neck, not guiding, not restraining, just present, and the dog leans into that presence as if it has been missing for longer than anyone realized, his breathing slower now, more even, the sharp edge that once defined him dissolving into something steady and quiet. And behind the glass the tension has turned into something heavier, something closer to accountability, because every person in that room can feel it now, the shift in truth, the weight of what they got wrong, and one of the supervisors steps forward, hand resting against the panel as if trying to steady himself, eyes fixed on the scene unfolding just a few feet away, replaying every report, every conclusion, every moment they chose certainty over curiosity, and Daniel senses it without turning, the attention, the scrutiny, but he does not acknowledge it, because this is not for them, this is for the animal who never had a voice in the room, and slowly, carefully, he moves his hand along the dog's shoulder, feeling the tension that still lingers beneath the surface, not gone, just quieted, like a storm that has not fully passed but no longer needs to be feared, and the dog does not resist, instead he shifts his weight closer, closing the remaining distance, his body language no longer guarded but grounded. And it becomes clear that what they are witnessing is not obedience, it is trust rebuilding itself in real time, fragile, deliberate, undeniable, and Daniel finally speaks again, not loudly, not for the room, just enough for the dog to hear. A simple tone, calm and steady, the kind that carries intention without force, and the dog responds with the smallest movement, a subtle lift of the head, eyes soft, focused, present, and that is when Daniel understands the final piece. This dog was never reacting to people, he was reacting to a moment that was never resolved, a signal that was triggered without closure, and everything that followed was just a continuation of that unfinished response. And now, for the first time, someone has stepped into that moment instead of stepping away from it. Someone has allowed the dog to complete what he was trained to do, and in doing so, has given him something he was never given before, resolution, and behind the glass a quiet conversation begins, voices low, uncertain, no longer confident in the decisions already made, because the evidence is right in front of them, alive, breathing, undeniable. And one of the handlers slowly reaches for the file on the table, flipping through pages that suddenly feel incomplete, as if the truth was never written down, only assumed, and Daniel gently withdraws his hand just a few inches, testing, not to challenge, but to confirm, and the dog follows that movement, not with urgency, not with fear, but with calm intent, staying connected, staying present, and that simple motion says more than any report ever could, because it proves what no one wanted to believe. That nothing about this dog was ever beyond saving. It only required someone willing to understand before deciding his fate. The room no longer feels like a place of control, it feels like a place where something unseen is finally being understood, and Daniel remains steady, his posture relaxed but intentional, allowing the dog to stay close without pressure, without expectation, and the dog does not return to the restless pacing they described in every report, he does not retreat into that tight circle of confusion. Instead, he stays anchored beside Daniel as if a question that has echoed inside him for months has finally been answered, and behind the glass the silence breaks, not with commands, but with uncertainty, low voices questioning procedures that once felt unquestionable, one handler pointing toward the bottle still resting in Daniel's hand, another flipping through the incident file again, slower this time, reading details that were once overlooked, and it becomes clear that something small was missed, something simple. A variable that turned instinct into misunderstanding, and Daniel gently rises from one knee, not abruptly, not in a way that would disrupt the fragile calm, just enough to change the angle between them, and the dog adjusts with him, matching the movement without hesitation, staying close, not out of obedience, but because he has chosen to, and that choice is what changes everything, because control can be trained, but trust must be given. And Daniel looks down at him for a brief moment, eyes soft, not proud, not victorious, just certain, and he takes a slow step backward, testing again, creating space, and the dog follows, one quiet step, then another, no tension, no resistance. Just a steady presence that mirrors Daniel's own, and the handlers watching cannot ignore it anymore. The pattern is clear now, the reaction was never random, it was tied to something specific. Something environmental, something they failed to isolate, and as that realization settles, the weight of their earlier decision becomes heavier, because it was never about a dog that could not be managed, it was about a system that did not ask the right questions, and Daniel reaches out once more, resting his hand gently along the side of the dog's neck, feeling the warmth beneath the fur, the steady rhythm of breath that no longer carries that sharp edge of alertness, and for the first time since this began, the dog exhales fully, a long, quiet release that seems to let go of something he has been holding onto for far too long, and the room feels it, even from behind the glass, because it is not just the animal that is changing, it is the understanding around him. And one of the supervisors finally steps toward the door, hand hovering over the control panel, no longer certain that the line between safety and fear was ever drawn correctly, and Daniel does not look back. He does not need confirmation, because the truth is already here, alive in the stillness between him and the dog, and as the seconds pass, what was once labeled as a problem begins to reveal itself as something else entirely, something that was never broken, only misunderstood, waiting for someone willing to stand still long enough to see it clearly. The door opens with a soft mechanical click that sounds louder than it should, and every eye in the observation room shifts at once, Because that sound means something has changed, not just in protocol, but in belief, and Daniel does not turn toward it. He does not acknowledge the movement behind him. He stays exactly where he is, grounded in the quiet understanding that has formed between him and the dog hears it too, the subtle shift in the room, the faint movement of air as the door unlocks. But he does not react the way they expected he would. He does not retreat into tension or rise into alertness. Instead, he remains still, steady, anchored beside Daniel as if the chaos that once defined him no longer has a place to return to. And that is when the supervisor steps inside, slow, careful, every movement measured, not out of fear, but out of respect for something he no longer fully understands, and for a moment he simply watches, taking in the scene that contradicts everything written in the report stacked on his desk, the dog once labeled as unmanageable now standing calm, present, connected, and Daniel finally glances up. Not for approval, not for instruction, just a brief acknowledgement that the moment has shifted beyond just the two of them, and the supervisor exhales quietly, a sound that carries more weight than words because it holds the realization that a decision made in certainty is now standing on uncertain ground, and he takes one step closer, then another, testing the space the way Daniel did, not imposing, not commanding, just observing, and the dog turns his head slightly, eyes tracking the movement. Not with suspicion, but with awareness, the kind of awareness that comes from training, not aggression, and Daniel sees it clearly now. This was never about behavior that needed to be corrected, it was about a response that needed to be understood, and as the supervisor comes within a few feet, he pauses, looking at Daniel, then at the dog, then back again, as if asking a question he does not yet know how to form, and Daniel gives the smallest nod, not as permission, but as reassurance. And slowly, cautiously, the supervisor lowers his hand, not fully, just enough to offer presence without pressure, and the dog watches, processing, evaluating, and for a brief second the room seems to hold its breath again, because this is where the old pattern would have returned. This is where everything should fall back into the narrative they built, but it does not. Instead, the dog remains calm, steady, grounded in the moment that Daniel created, and the supervisor feels it, the shift, the absence of fear, the presence of something else, something that feels closer to trust and control, and he lets his hand hover there for a moment before slowly withdrawing, not out of rejection, but out of understanding. Because he realizes that this is not something to be rushed, not something to be claimed, it is something that must be earned, and as he steps back, the silence in the room transforms once more, no longer filled with doubt, but with a quiet, undeniable truth, that what they are witnessing is not a miracle, not luck, but the result of one simple difference. Someone chose to listen instead of assume, and in doing so, uncovered something that had been there all along, waiting beneath the surface, unseen, unheard, but never truly gone. Time does not rush forward, it settles, stretching into a quiet space where every movement carries meaning, and Daniel remains beside the dog without urgency, his presence steady, grounded, allowing the moment to unfold at its own pace, because he understands now that what they are witnessing cannot be forced, it can only be allowed, and the dog stays close, not pressed against him, not seeking protection, but choosing proximity in a way that feels deliberate, aware, and for the first time since entering this place, he is no longer reacting to the environment, he is existing within it, and behind them the supervisor slowly steps back, giving space not just physically, but mentally, as if realizing that control is no longer the objective here, understanding is, and the observation room grows quieter, not because there is nothing to say, but because everything that needed to be said has already been answered without words, and one of the handlers leans against the wall, arms folded loosely now instead of tense, eyes fixed on the dog with a different kind of focus, no longer searching for threat, but for truth, replaying every detail in a new light, the scent, the timing, the reaction, the pattern that was always there but never recognized, and Daniel finally takes a slow step toward the open space of the room, away from the cage, testing something deeper than behavior, testing freedom, and the dog follows without hesitation, not pulled, not commanded, just aligned, each step matching Daniel's pace as if they have done this 100 times before, and that is when it becomes undeniable to everyone watching. This was never about containment, it was about connection, and as they move a few feet farther from the steel enclosure, the dog pauses briefly, glancing back at it, not with fear, not with attachment, but with something that feels like closure, as if a chapter has ended without anyone announcing it, and Daniel notices the glance, the quiet acknowledgement of where this began, and he lowers his hand once more, palm open, offering reassurance without words, and the dog turns back to him, choosing forward instead of retreat, and that choice echoes louder than anything spoken in the room, because it marks the moment where instinct gives way to trust, where confusion gives way to clarity, and the supervisor exhales again, longer this time, the weight of earlier decisions shifting into something heavier, something that cannot be ignored, because this is no longer a theory, it is proof, and he looks toward the others, not needing to speak for them to understand that everything they believed must now be reconsidered. And Daniel kneels once more, not because he needs to, but because it keeps the connection equal, grounded, respectful, and the dog steps closer again, resting his head lightly against Daniel's shoulder this time, a gesture so simple it almost goes unnoticed, but it carries a depth that cannot be measured, because it is not trained, it is chosen, and in that quiet contact, something deeper settles between them, something beyond obedience, beyond protocol. Something that feels like recognition, and the room absorbs it fully, the silence no longer tense. No longer uncertain, but reflective, heavy with the understanding that they were never dealing with a problem to eliminate. They were witnessing a message they failed to hear, and now that it has been heard, everything must change, not just for this dog, but for every assumption that came before, and as Daniel gently rests his hand along the dog's back, feeling the steady rhythm of breath beneath his palm, he does not look at the room, he does not wait for approval, because the moment has already spoken for itself, and sometimes, that is the only kind of truth that matters. The moment does not end with applause or commands or anything loud enough to mark it as history, it ends in quiet, the kind that settles deep into the bones of everyone standing there, and Daniel slowly rises to his feet, not breaking the connection, not rushing the outcome, just allowing the space to evolve naturally, and the dog remains beside him, steady, grounded, no longer defined by the walls that once held him. And for a brief second Daniel looks down at him, really looks, as if seeing not what he was labeled to be, but what he has always been beneath it, a partner waiting for clarity, a mind trained for purpose, not punishment, and behind them the supervisor steps forward again, this time without hesitation, his posture no longer guarded but resolved, because the decision that once felt simple has become something far more complex, something that requires accountability. And he reaches for the radio at his shoulder, pausing just long enough to choose his words carefully. Then speaks in a calm, measured tone, "Cancel the order," effective immediately, and the words hang in the air longer than they should, not because they are loud, but because they change everything, and the handlers behind the glass exchange glances that carry both relief and reflection, knowing that what they almost finalized cannot be undone in memory, only corrected moving forward, and Daniel hears it without reacting. Because he was never here to win a decision, he was here to understand a truth, and now that truth has spoken for itself, and the dog shifts slightly, stepping closer, his shoulder brushing against Daniel's leg in a quiet gesture that feels almost like acknowledgement, and Daniel rests his hand gently along his back, not as a command, but as a shared moment, and together they stand in the open space of the room, no longer separated by steel or assumption, just two beings connected by something simple and rare, and as the minutes pass, the atmosphere begins to change in ways that are harder to define, the tension that once filled the building replaced by a quiet sense of humility, because understanding does not just solve a problem, it reveals how close they came to making the wrong choice. And one of the handlers finally steps forward, slowly, carefully, not to take control, but to observe more closely, his eyes no longer scanning for risk, but for meaning, and he kneels a few feet away, mirroring the posture Daniel used, not imitating him, but learning from what he witnessed, and the dog notices, watching him with calm awareness, not threatened, not defensive, just present, and for the first time, the handler does not feel fear, he feels responsibility. Because he realizes that trust is not built through authority, It is built through understanding, and Daniel takes a step back. Then, just one, creating space, not leaving, just allowing the connection to extend beyond him. And the dog does not panic, does not retreat, he simply watches, steady, confident, no longer anchored by confusion. And that is when it becomes clear to everyone in the room that this is not a temporary shift, it is a restoration, something that was always there, waiting beneath the weight of misunderstanding. And the supervisor lowers his radio, his expression softer now, less certain in the way he once was, but more certain in something deeper, that the way forward cannot be built on assumption alone. And he looks at Daniel, holding that gaze for a moment, a silent acknowledgement that no report could capture what just happened here, and Daniel gives a small nod in return, not as acceptance of praise, but as recognition of shared responsibility, and the dog stands between them, calm, steady, breathing evenly. No longer a problem to be solved, but a partner ready to serve again. And as the scene settles into stillness, something unspoken lingers in the air, a realization that does not need to be said aloud, that sometimes what we fear is not danger, but misunderstanding, and sometimes what saves a life is not strength or control, but the willingness to listen, even when everything tells you not to. And as Daniel finally turns toward the door, taking a slow step forward, the dog moves with him, not commanded, not restrained, just choosing to follow. And in that simple choice, everything that needed to be proven has already been done, not through force, not through correction, but through something far quieter. Something that stays long after the moment has passed, the understanding that even the most misunderstood soul is never beyond reaching, it is only waiting for someone brave enough to see it clearly.